basically, Beth is someone who has been going out, I believe, in your hometown. Is that right, Beth?
Yeah, most of my protests or demonstrations are done here in Davis, California, but Sacramento, Woodland, Bay Area.
Yes, yes. And and can you just explain to people what what your approach is and what you've been doing? I've been watching you obviously the last few months or weeks, but other people may not quite know why I'm speaking to you. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Let's see. I'm a mother who, got involved in this gender madness maybe 6 years ago through my own experience with my daughter. And I started really investigating what was happening in our school systems here in California and how kids are being taught these lies in their health and science class. And I looked to some of the Democratic groups in my town, women rights groups like League of Women Voters, and they weren't interested in getting involved in what I was trying to do. So I reached out to Moms for Liberty and got involved with that group, became a chapter chair. And, it's been a couple of years now, but I've done work trying to expose what's happening at Kaiser Permanente with an undercover story. And I speak out on girls and women's rights to fair sports. So, those are the three areas I really hit on: the schools indoctrinating children, the medical scandal with our HMOs and our gender clinics, and then the sports, because that's easy for people to understand. And I wish it was the prisons and women that are being harmed in our prisons, but unfortunately, people are more interested in the sports issue.
Yeah, yeah. It's a strange fight, and you're in a very strange version of it, because I've seen people who do the work you do in other ways. Of course, there's Sidewalk Steve, who I think you know. Is that right?
Right. I've had contact, and I've met Bill Easton, Billboard Chris in person here at our California legislature, and I've contacted Steve and his wife Beth, who do also the same kind of work that I'm trying to do, which is just getting on the street and trying to have a conversation with people by asking questions and having our signs and just really interacting with the people that are pushing this ideology.
The thing, though, that I find most interesting about you, though, Beth, is that you obviously know a lot of the people who you're speaking to, and it's very, because like I saw one thing where you went up to a group of women at a stand and started asking them questions, and of course they can never answer. It's the strangest thing that you have all these people supporting a movement and they can't actually answer a single question on the movement, but they all just turn their back on you. Which is something that we who are in this fight are used to have happening in a more general sense, or perhaps in an online sense. But you go right up to the people who think that you're evil and speak to them, and their responses are just very revealing, I find. I mean, like, what kind of things do you tend to get, would you say? What are the most common responses you get? Sorry, by the way, I should explain. I managed to cut myself while I was shaving, so I might have to dab at this every so often. So apologies. Yeah, sorry, Beth. What do you come across most in responses?
Well, the example you gave, that's a really interesting one, because when I approached those women, I knew one of them was a neighbor, a mother who her son was also at my daughter's preschool, so she'd seen my daughter grow up, and she knew how intelligent my daughter was, and she also saw that my daughter basically desisted by the time she got to her senior year of high school. She changed her name. But the common response I get, and I've noticed this for, 5 years, including when I used to sit with my friends around the coffee table, we were all liberal Democrats. And I would say something like, hey, don't you think this is kind of unfair what happened with, Riley Gaines and Leah Thomas at the swim meet? Oh, well, it's, sports aren't necessarily about competition, or, of course, Leah should get a chance to compete.
Leah.
So the common response is always like, it's just a few people this is impacting. Shouldn't that trans woman also have these rights? Or why are you so obsessed with this issue? Or could we just change the subject? So, yes. but real quickly, to go back to that woman who, I was saying, why are you doing this? Her husband is a sociology professor here at St. Mary's, and he wrote this article in yesterday's newspaper about me, and the headline is "MAGA extremists demonize your friends and neighbors." So this is a classic response. So now, instead of me being a concerned mother, I'm a MAGA extremist for asking questions. So
well, that's what we got from America when we started asking questions on Turf Island. We were all these left-wing women were quite puzzled to suddenly hear that they were Trump supporters, and it was funny because it became such a kind of cliche for people to say that to us, that a lot of people just kind of became radicalized by it, in the sense that, if Trump is going to stop men cheating in women's prisons or cheating in women's sports, and men in women's prisons, and children being mutilated, then we will support him as long as he goes to stop that, But the MAGA thing is so clearly a way of trying to shut you down, because they know you're not MAGA.
Right, exactly. I'm like, there's nothing about me that's an extremist. I'm just saying, look what happened to my own child, and look at these numbers of the other, kids in choir and theater who are also, being kind of misled or brainwashed by this idea. And then look at even my own story, how I got approved for all these surgeries and testosterone, and so they're trying anything to silence us,
Wow. Well,
this.
Did you try to apply just to see how easy it was?
Oh, yes. That was a year and a half ago. I did an undercover story with Colin Wright. He writes
yes, I know
Reality's Last Stand. And he'd come to Davis and done a talk about our schools indoctrinating kids. And, he's got his PhD in biology, right? He has a degree from UC Davis here in this town. Yeah. And, my friends wouldn't even come to the talk that I was hosting. These friends that I'd had for 20 years, nobody would come hear Colin Wright speak on this.
Yeah.
But I did an undercover story with the same doctors who were talking to my daughter about, I just declared that I was non-binary, and they changed my medical records in 45 minutes. And then I was able to meet with my primary care physician to get testosterone in 10 minutes, $5 copay. And I went for the top surgery, got approved, non-binary top surgery. And that was $100 copay. And then I went for it. I got the phalloplasty approved. And they made an exception for me because I said I wasn't willing to take the testosterone.
Yeah.
But they said, what, we're going, if this is what you want, we're going to give it to you. So it took about 8 months to get approved for both surgeries. And a total hysterectomy, a gender-affirming total hysterectomy. And so, unfortunately, I'm an adult, but I still wanted to just make the case, this is insane. It's not medicine, right? Basically, the patient goes in, I diagnose myself as non-binary, and they say, what treatment do you want? And then they say, this is so wonderful, yourself, and we don't want to be gatekeepers. We'll get you, whatever we can do to make this easy for you to find your true, authentic self.
Yeah.
So you know the medical scandal part of this.
Absolutely. But it does take. I mean, I presume that people are familiar with your story and what happened to your daughter, but they still, I don't know. It's still quite extraordinary to see them so reluctant to engage, and even. But it's also very interesting to see all the arguments we hear online shown in real life. Like that woman there at the start, she did two things that are quite common. First thing is she said it's not happening. That 15-year-old girls are. This is the first thing they will always say, and then the second thing they say is it's good that it's happening. But she didn't. She just insulted you. She just insulted you by saying that you don't have any friends and walked off, Yeah. So why do you think the truth of this issue, which has been borne out in things like the CAST review, the WPATH files, and all sorts of other we have Finland stopping the operations. We have people reversing. The Dutch protocol is no longer seen as sturdy. Why do you think it's so persistent? Why do you think people are so convinced, so determined to hang on to the narrative?
Well, I think that it could be that that this is part of what it means to be, at least in a blue state, blue city, to be part of the community. And this is a community of progressive liberals, right?
Yeah.
And it all comes together. So you have to believe in open borders. You have to believe in the COVID vaccine. You have to believe in the transgender child. You have to believe in, there's a whole list of things that go in with these views. And I think, they don't want to be red pilled, right? If all of a sudden they find out that there's really no such thing as a transgender child, then what else does it mean for all their belief system? And then does it mean they're no longer part of their community? And in a town like Davis, where it's 85% Democrat, we've become this like group thing where everyone agrees, everyone nods their head when I'm out, with my old friends, right? We all agree on the same thing on every issue. And you don't want to be left out of your group, and you don't want to not get along with your, the other teachers in the teachers lounge, or you don't want to, your kids to not be accepted at the school. And so everyone just goes along to get along, right? And I think it's, this issue is going to be really a hard one to finally get people to admit, because I think it'll open up a lot of other things that they're going to need to question.
Yeah, one of the things that people have said to me is that it's quite destabilizing when you realize that, let's take the example of trans medicine, that there's no actual base for it. There's nothing there. The only thing that's there is the standards of care that were invented by a group of people who think eunuch is a gender identity. I mean, these are mad. These are mad people. And the WPATH files revealed that they were willing to trans people, even who were psychotic. There was one doctor who said, unfortunately, I couldn't sign off on her because she had a psychotic episode in the room as they were having the conversation. So I know how frightening that is, because once you realize there's no one at the wheel, it kind of makes you feel both master of your own world, but also very vulnerable and very alone. Can I ask, what is the effect? When did you start going from just your mother protecting your child to activist? Was it during that period, or was it afterwards? And can you, without wanting to get too much into personal details, can you tell us a little bit about what your daughter went through?
Oh, sure. Okay, so the one event that really got me most activated was when they were hosting a speaker here at our Davis schools, and she was going to be talking about the transgender child. It was hosted by the school district, brought in an author activist to talk about this, and kids 12 and over were invited. So I reached out to another mother in Davis, Allie Snyder, Snide, not Snarky, I think is her name on Twitter, and then Erin Friday. And the three of us together, we did a demonstration in front of the high school that my daughter went to. And we spoke out at the school board meeting. And we said, we can't bring in an author who's talking about gender transition plans at the school and, basically cutting parents off if they're not affirming. And, I think it went really well. The high school kids wrote a story about it. Actually the author of that story was a trans identified girl. And so she got to hear our side and also their side.
Yes.
And so, soon after that, they wrote a big article, a 5-page story about my daughter and me called How a Davis Mom's Very Public Anti-Trans Stance Has Pushed Away Her Non-Binary Teen. So the space between us. But
wow.
So it's a 5-page story, but what's really nice about it is it included a lot of photos and video of my daughter talking about herself and how she had changed. She identified as a trans boy, and then she identifies as non-binary, and she changed her names, and she spoke about me and my activism, and I think she did it in a loving way, right? It was like, this is my mother, she makes my friends, my community feel unsafe, but I don't think she's doing it from a place of
Hate.
to be to be hateful. And so, and it was nice because she shared her story, and so then I didn't feel like I was always invading her privacy by talking about kind of what we experienced as a family. It impacted the grandparents, it impacted her sibling, it impacted me and my community.
How many years did her identifying as something other than a girl? How long did that go on?
So it started in 2017. And so she would have been about 13 years old. And several of her classmates, they were all in the honors gifted classes. They were all in theater or choir. They were, very similar type girls. And I would say to the school counselor, why all of a sudden do we have all these girls who think they're boys? And and then the school counselor was like, well, we just went to this training in Palm Springs with the teachers union, and we learned about the LGBTQ, students and what we need to do to support them. But I had no idea that, my daughter's the first kind of cohort of kids to be taught this in their science and health class. So I actually asked to sit in on my son's health class so I could watch the gender identity unit be taught. And it just blew me away. They were showing pictures of women who had top surgery, with their shirts off, calling them trans men, showing a pregnant woman with a beard and, mustache and facial hair. And then they showed Bruce Jenner as Caitlyn Jenner as the example of the trans woman. And, they're showing these pictures to kids in junior high school. So, so my daughter's trans boy identity lasted almost 3 years. And then she switched her name and her pronouns her senior year. And she was living only with her father her senior year, which, I think it actually gave her some space to maybe not have mom, looking over her shoulder when she was getting ready for school. Yes. And then she changed her name, again, when she got to college. I was glad that she wasn't medicalized. And that was the biggest thing, is that I said, no, you cannot be medicalized until you're 18, even if your Kaiser doctor is saying that, as an endocrinologist at Kaiser said to me that it was life-saving, gender affirming care to put my own daughter on testosterone. And I just pushed back. I said, she's not going to be the guinea pig. We don't have any long-term studies on this. And, he said, well, it's the WPATH protocol. And I
said that, did he?
I don't care who WPATH is. I'm like, we're not going to experiment on my daughter. We're just not. And so I'm really fortunate that her father, my ex-husband, agreed to that. And it gave her the time, because it does take, 3, 4, 5, 6 years for people to outgrow this. And it usually takes
is going through puberty to rid you of it. Is that what happened with your daughter? Excuse me, that's a very personal thing to talk about, but
no, that's okay. No, she was already past the Turner 2 stage, so she actually wasn't a candidate for puberty blockers. Right. But she's incredibly intellectually gifted, a National Merit Scholar, which perfect math scores on the SAT. So but you're also socially sometimes, it just takes a little longer to mature and want to be a woman. So, I think, for depending on when you take on your trans identity, it just takes a few years for it to wear off and for you to get tired of always having to put on this persona, and I think eventually my daughter wanted to wear makeup and try her hair long and, things that, when you're 13, 14 years old and you're scared to become a woman, I was a tomboy. I like dressing like my 3 older brothers. I like doing the same things as them. So it was very easy for me to understand why my daughter actually getting to be a trans boy is kind of liberating, unfortunately, in this world now where we're expecting girls and women to act, in these regressive sex stereotypes.
Yeah, and also it's interesting, isn't it? You point out, that your daughter is has all these gifts, presumably an imaginative and artistic person. These are the kids who are being caught by this, and it's another one of the reasons why I hate it so much. Often I will list the things that can cause kids to have a trans identity. Autism is in there, you know. There's a few. Sorry, my mind's gone blank. But autism is definitely one of the ones in there. Gifted is another. Imaginative, and empathetic.
Yes.
Young girls are often very empathetic, and they want to be good. And it seems now that one quick way of doing this is to actually place themselves in what they think is a tiny marginalized community.
Exactly.
Yeah, it seems like, unfortunately, and I bang on about this all the time, Beth. So you'll have to forgive me, but it seems to me that part of the reason is that there's not a strong youth culture outside of trans. Has swallowed everything, and there's
Right.
no kind of cultural movement. There's no artistic movement. There's no musical movement. So these kids are finding a kind of expression in something that in the old days would have been taken care of by a Bob Dylan, David Bowie tour, But these days, there's no safe outlet for all this experimentation, all this kind of identity swapping. It seems to have been, it's hard to explain, but it seems to have been, they seem to have medicalized a very normal part of every kid's youth, and you're lucky if you're not smart.
I know. I've often joked, not so much that you're not smart, but if your child is more interested in being in, FFA or playing on the football team or doing, just kind of stuff outside of this gifted theater world,
Yes.
it's a lot safer.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's why a lot of the industries that are kind of have been taken over by all this are very middle class industries, very upper middle class industries, like publishing and theater. They're places where the kids, they haven't had they've had a little bit too much time to think about themselves, because that's what middle class privileged kids do. It's boredom for one thing. Um, when your daughter desisted, did that come along with complete acceptance of everything you've been saying, or is there still some doubt in her head? One of the things I'd love to talk to you about here is just the way that people simply don't believe you. It's an extraordinary thing to see. And yeah, do you pick up any of that from your daughter as well?
So, there's two parts to that question. So, I should just point out too, I'm in a university town. So I'm in University of California, Davis is in this town. And so my daughter was, in a Montessori school program. And so many of her friends' parents work at the university. And I would say most of my women friends, they have advanced degrees from Ivy League schools, from Stanford, from Princeton. They're all highly educated, liberal, progressive women. And so at her school, we started to see transgender children when my daughter was in kindergarten, right? It was a mother who had gone to Columbia. She had 3 boys, and she said her second boy was a trans girl, right? A 2-year-old, because he was
Yeah,
wearing dresses. And, I looked at all my friends. This is 2013. And I said, this kind of makes me uncomfortable that this mother is saying she has a trans girl. And I noticed that all the other women, they just went along with it. And I just thought, wow, this is what happens when you're in a university town and everybody is highly educated. So this queer theory and this gender studies that comes through academia
yeah,
had taken over my town. So all of my daughter's friends whose parents are professors and researchers, they all believe this because it's part of our university.
yeah,
And I work at the university. I was placed on investigatory leave for 8 months because I speak out on this. So we're in a university town where the liberal media suppresses any free speech. My employer suppresses any free speech, any diverse viewpoints at all.
yeah.
Um, And so for my daughter, I don't actually know what her views are on this because we haven't spoken in 2.5 years. So she does allow me to send her emails and gifts, but
Yeah.
it's more one way. So I'm not really sure, but I'm hoping that, maybe something I've said or somebody else has said, maybe it's a sports issue, maybe it's a prison issue. Maybe she has friends that are, are detransitioners now.
Yeah.
There are at least, I know of at least 6 girls from Davis High School that have had top surgery, a double mastectomy. So, and these were the girls that were in her class, school, who we thought would grow up to be lesbian girls, right?
Yeah.
And they all became trans boys.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
so
There's another shocking thing about this is how it's decimated the young lesbian scene. Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but also I do think that sometimes people are being protective of their friends who they themselves have not yet peaked, because if they've gone so far as to have double mastectomies, they can't admit that they've done anything wrong. So hopefully that wound will heal after a while. But what do you think? Why do you think, like, the sheer disbelief people have? First of all, let's talk about where that comes from. Like, everyone is protecting themselves. You can tell that people are protecting themselves from engaging with you. Like, recently, we've seen someone cough in your face rather than talk to you. For a long period of time.
Oh yeah, it was 20 minutes. She was coughing and playing the harmonica within 6 inches of my face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was yesterday. Yesterday here in the town, 10 miles away. But that woman, she's a trans-identified woman, and she has a trans-identified child, and she runs the Davis Queer Teen Group, which is basically a group of, teenagers who get together to talk about, being transgender. That's the queer trans thing. And I think she's starting to realize that I'm becoming stronger. I've been showing up to the last week of school. I showed up to the junior high school. I showed up to the elementary schools with my signs. And, some of these kids who are trans identified, they want to talk to me. And when they talk to me, you can see how really wrong this whole medicine, how we're harming these kids, right? They say it in their own words. And so she is so worried that I'm going to keep speaking that she comes into my face now and just, holds up her flags and does all kinds of crazy stuff. And I just,
of course they'd be terrified of you speaking to any of these kids, because they're lying to them. They're telling them not just a lie, but an incredibly harmful lie. Can I ask what is this? I mean, like I lost my friends as well. Not in the same area, but in the same kind of in the world of entertainment, which is where I was. But I never went up to them and actually had confrontations with them, because for one thing, I would get the kind of responses that you get, but for another thing, it was just, I don't like confrontation either. So it feels like even more brave for you to be going up to these people who will just say to your face what my friends are too scared to say to mine. Does that ever get you down? I mean, you seem so cheerful on the videos. You don't ever seem to there seems to be no chink in your armor. But does it ever demoralize you? Like, they're doing their best to demoralize you.
I would say for every 20 interactions I have where it's just, I'm Teflon, right? It's just off my skin. Every 20th one will actually really hurt. And I'll get that feeling, that pit of my stomach where I'm like, oh my God, that was somebody who, they knew me, they know who I am. And yet they're saying that I'm a monster, I'm doing something wrong, right? But they try to find a way, or you'll never get your daughter back if you keep doing that. They try to find some way to hurt me in a personal way.
Yes.
And but then I just for a second, I just try to remind myself, they're going to do everything possible to try to get us to stop speaking out, right? They're going to come after our jobs. They're going to come after our neighbors, our friends, our families. And so you can't get down on it. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, this might cheer you up. Someone just replied, Beth is very brave. She stands her ground. California is a mess, and Beth decided to talk back. Heaven forbid. Beth is creating change. A one-woman wrecking ball. Brava. That's exactly how I feel when I watch your videos, Beth, you know. So what are your plans? What are your plans next? Are there big dates that you're planning to go to, or is your stuff more local? Like what's coming up? I have to say it's been great to see in America the wonderful changes that the detransitioners brought about a few weeks ago, and you know, and also it's interesting to watch stuff from America, Beth, because in the UK we had all these moments, but we were very isolated, you know. Whereas in America, it feels like everyone at the same time is just part of this movement. I don't know whether you saw. I just tweeted the governor of Maine being roundly booed at a meeting and not unable to talk because people are shouting things like "stand up for your daughters" and stuff like this. You know, do you feel like it's turning around a little bit in America? Do you feel like you're part of a change that's happening?
You know, I love that Maine example because I am in contact with a lot of those, like their Maine, I think it's called like Maine fathers, but you know, group of men who have seen what's happened in the sports issue, and you know, Maine has also, fortunately, it's a blue state, but it has a strong Republican group, and it's a
Yes.
small state, so they're feeling empowered to come and speak out, and it's just so exciting. I just saw that video too. Um,
Yeah.
so what I'm doing in the near future is, you know, what I'm doing, but even more of it. We're speaking out at the California legislature. I've been connected with a detransitioner, Layla Jane. You can follow on Twitter, but she's just an amazing young woman, 20 years old. She was medicalized with top surgery when she was 13 at Kaiser Permanente. Similar story to Chloe Cole, but she's real local, so we can do things together. So we've been at these Pride events together.
Right.
I'm also going to be in Washington, D.C. I think it's July 9th for the Federal Trade Commission. It's going to be looking at, you know, the fraud around this medicalizing of young people and adults. So that's kind of a national event I'm excited for.
Yeah.
You know, it's summertime, so I won't be speaking out as much at schools, but I'm just really encouraged to keep having these conversations and just put them on video and share them because, you know, I think they look kind of, I don't even know how to say it, but
they show you what's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
You're having the kind of conversations with real people that many of us have online, because real people usually just refuse to engage. But you force these conversations, and it's very useful. I hope you don't mind a suggestion, but I think after a while you'll get enough of the same kind of answers. That's not happening. It's good that it's happening. They're not medicalizing kids, all that stuff. You'll get enough of them that you'll be able to do a kind of a compilation of and shape it into a picture of what we've been kind of fighting these last few years. A sort of you know, a cultish adherence to certain I guess comforting truths that they're carrying about that are simply not true. So I think you're doing great work, and I think just by confronting these people, you're showing people how to be, as you say with the Maine fathers, you're showing people how to be brave. So yeah, keep it up, Beth. I love your work. I love people. I love seeing people actually answer or actually being confronted with questions that they can usually hide from. So yeah, I hope you'll carry on for as long as you can.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. It's
Not at all. And you know, if there's anything you need shared or anything like that, let me know. I often share your stuff anyway because it's also. But if there's anything you need, let me know. And is there anything you'd like to tell the viewers of things to look out for themselves? Anything coming up? Any advice or?
No, I think my one advice would be is don't worry what you sound like, or if you're saying things right or wrong. It's just be so proud of yourself that you actually had that conversation at the grocery store, or you spoke out at the school board meeting. Like, if you just use your voice and just be proud of yourself for being willing to take a risk and kind of be out there.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, Beth, that's great. Please keep up the good work. Thank you so much for chatting to me. And if there's anything else that Beth would like to share, I'll put it in the YouTube comments, or I'll put it in a little space under the video later on. But in the meantime, keep yourself safe, for God's sake. And I will say goodbye to these people and say goodbye to you in one sec. Thank you, everyone. I will see you next time. I'm going to be doing more of these now that I'm safely in Phoenix. So yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay here for